Special counsel Jack Smith is moving to drop the election interference and classified documents cases against President-elect Trump. Smith said the Department of Justice determined the prosecution must be dismissed to comply with the department policy that blocks the indictment and prosecution of a sitting president. If approved by the judge, it would end the prosecution of Trump for efforts to overturn the 2020 election that culminated with his supporters storming the Capitol. It would also end another case brought by Smith accusing Trump of violating the Espionage Act and obstructing justice in his handling of classified documents after he left office. In a statement, a Trump spokesman called the DOJ decision a major victory for the rule of law. Israeli officials say they are within days of reaching a deal to end fighting with Hezbollah in Lebanon. The statements come after a weekend of violence. An Israeli airstrike in central Beirut on Saturday killed 29 people, according to the Lebanese health ministry. Hezbollah then fired hundreds of rockets into Israel, injuring several people and damaging buildings in northern and central parts of the country. Joining us with the latest, Julia Manchester, national political reporter here at The Hill. Julia, what is the latest on these ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hezbollah?
Well, look, it seems like there definitely are a few steps towards progress. We're seeing that the Israeli government or the Israeli officials have said that, they see this as a positive step. But first, the Israeli government has to vote on this. So that will go to a vote in Israel on Tuesday. And we know that there has been some opposition to a potential ceasefire, including from some far-right members of Israel's government. So it's not a done deal yet. And there are still some sticking points, including some points on, if Hezbollah or if an outside force were to make a move on Israel, if Israel would be able to respond in kind, if something were to happen down the road. But, U.S. officials involved in the talks say they hope that this can be a 60-day peace deal that could eventually lead to a longer peace deal between the two sides. We have to remember this, back and forth between Hezbollah and Israel has been actually happening since October 8th, 2023, the day after the October 7th terror attacks in Israel by Hamas. So Israel sort of being hit by two sides, Hezbollah and Hamas, and all of this, and it's all taking place sort of in the shadow of the Gaza war, and as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues to get worse.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is said to have approved of this deal in principle. What can you tell us, though, about the parameters of what the deal entails?
Well, look, I think about, in terms of what the deal entails, a lot of it has to do with some of those sticking points, when Israel would be able to strike, what, limits would be put on Hezbollah, for example, where troops could be stationed in northern Israel or southern Lebanon. So I think there are a few very key, crucial points, sticking points that there are some agreements on. But, tomorrow on Tuesday, we're going to hear more about, whether the majority of the Israeli government is behind this. Like I said, I think there are a number of very conservative Israeli officials who are against this because they believe this automatically puts Israel, on a defensive, in a defensive posture when they'd rather be on the offensive. So going forward, this isn't a done deal, but I think it's notable that Netanyahu seems to be optimistic, at least in principle, on the deal.
What does all this mean for the war in Gaza? Over the weekend, Hamas released these photos showing the body of a female hostage. It seems like while there might be progress on the front between Israel and Hezbollah, between Israel and Hamas, it just doesn't seem like there's an end in sight.
No, it doesn't. And on top of that, you also have, you have the hostage situation in Gaza with Israeli hostages being held, which has been horrific for the families of these hostages in Israel and for the Israeli people. But you also have the Palestinian people living in Gaza who have been under constant siege over the, well over a year now. So, in terms of public opinion towards Israel, I think in the region, obviously, and Israel has always sort of fought an uphill battle in terms of its perception by its neighbors in the Middle East. The worsening situation in Gaza does not necessarily help them with some of, the neighboring countries like Lebanon, like Hezbollah in Lebanon. We have to remember that Hezbollah and Hamas, there are ties between those two organizations. So these organizations are very much linked. Remember, like I said, Hezbollah strikes strikes on Israel started taking place on October 8th, 2023, one day after the Hamas attacks on October 7th. So, each of these organizations are sort of watching to see what happens next, and it could impact, Israel's standing in the region going forward. I mean, if Israel is less focused on the situation in the north with Hezbollah and Lebanon, they may be, able to focus more on what's happening in Gaza, but it's really unclear what will happen next.
I want to come back home and talk a little about Tulsi Gabbard. She is Trump's nominee for Director of National Intelligence. Over the weekend, Republican Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma was on Meet the Press, and he said that Republican senators would have lots of questions about her nomination. She made this trip to Syria where she met with Bashar al-Assad. She's been accused of repeating Russian propaganda. Do you think at this point in time she's going to have trouble getting confirmed?
I think it is certainly an uphill climb, and it became even more of an uphill climb than it was before last week when we saw Trump's Attorney General nominee, or former Attorney General nominee, former Congressman Matt Gaetz, drop out. He was seen as the most controversial of all of these picks, and he was sucking up the oxygen in terms of the media scrutiny and scrutiny from both Republicans and Democrats in terms of his nomination. So now we're seeing a lot of this focus shift onto Tulsi Gabbard, along with Pete Hegseth for Defense Secretary and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for the Department of Health and Human Services. But for someone like Tulsi Gabbard, there are a lot of questions, like you said, about that 2017 meeting with Bashar al-Assad. Why was she going to Syria? Why has she seemingly, parroted or repeated Russian talking points, during the Ukraine war? There's a lot of questions, and it's not just from Democrats. We're seeing, like from James Lankford, for example, there's questions as to whether she is qualified for this post, not only in terms of her experience, but in terms of, her past actions with foreign policy and whether, she could be compromised or not. You're seeing Democrats like, Tammy Duckworth, for example, suggest that she is compromised, in terms of what she's knows and who she's met with, et cetera. So there are a lot of questions going forward about her, and it's going to take a lot for her to change that narrative or turn it around.
Yeah, you mentioned Democrats accusing Gabbard of being compromised. Some Republicans, though, have come to her defense when that dynamic is put into place. Do we expect more of that, kind of Republicans reflexively defending her from these Democratic attacks? And could that be a good sign for the potential of her to actually be confirmed?
Yeah, I think we could see some of that. I think you'll see, some Republicans trying to defend President Trump and by extension her. Remember, she is President Trump's one of his selections for his cabinet, and he chose her because she is loyal to him. So I think you'll see, a number of these Republicans making their own calculations on how to move forward with this. But a big question for Gabbard going forward, and you're already seeing, for example, Tennessee Senator Bill Hagerty raise this. He, of course, was under consideration or thought to be under consideration for Treasury Secretary. They're pushing back against the idea that she needs to go through FBI background checks, or that other, these other nominees need to go through FBI background checks. They say that, they can go through background checks under a private firm or an independent firm. But a lot of Democrats, including Amy Klobuchar, certainly pushing for Gabbard to undergo FBI background checks. We'll see if that happens. But some Republicans, we're already seeing that might be a sticking point between Democrats and Republicans in the Senate.
All right, that's all I got for you. Julia Manchester, national political reporter here at The Hill. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Monday, the Menendez brothers will appear in court for the first time in nearly 30 years. The brothers were convicted in 1996 for the brutal murder of their parents 7 years prior. News Nation's Nancy Liu has the details on the new evidence and what's expected in court today.
Drew, today's status hearing is linked to a habeas petition filed last spring that is long before the Netflix documentary and drama show, which has spiked interest in the Menendez case. Today should also firm up details for a resentencing hearing scheduled for December 11th. Lyle and Erica Menendez will not be here. They'll be attending through a video feed from their correctional facility in San Diego. Now, on the motion, defense attorneys are asking the court to either vacate the brothers' conviction and sentence or grant a new evidentiary hearing. That's due to two key pieces of evidence that have surfaced since the convictions. It's a letter written by Eric 8 months before the murders detailing sexual abuse by his father. There's also a signed declaration by a former member of the band Menudo. Roy Rossello claims Jose Menendez raped him in 1984. Now, the brothers have served nearly 35 years of their life sentences for the 1989 shotgun murders of their parents in their Beverly Hills mansion, but have claimed all along that it was in self-defense, that they feared for their lives after years of sexual and physical abuse by their father. Now, the resentencing hearing on December 11th was triggered by outgoing DA George Gascon, but DA-elect Nathan Hochman has said he wants to make his own decision on whether to recommend resentencing after a thorough review of the case, and he does not take office until December 2nd. So Governor Gavin Newsom has said he'll hold off on a clemency consideration until after a decision by Nathan Hochman. Now, extra court security is here. We're also seeing extra crowds here because there is a public lottery for the 16 seats that are earmarked for members of the public inside court for today's hearing. Drew?
Nancy Liu, thank you for your reporting. Meantime, a judge is set to decide this week whether to let music mogul Sean Diddy Combs out on bail. That's after Diddy was charged and pleaded not guilty to charges that he coerced and abused women for years. Diddy's lawyers argued Friday for his release from a Brooklyn federal jail, proposing that he stay on house arrest at his home in Florida. Prosecutors argued that no bail conditions could mitigate Combs' risk of obstruction and dangerousness to others. The judge in the case said he would rule on Combs' bail request after both sides filed letters by noon Monday, fleshing out some of the arguments made in last Friday's hearing. This is the third time Diddy has asked a court to be released on bail. Both of the previous requests were denied. His trial is set to begin on May 5th. Representative-elect Sarah McBride from Delaware is responding after House Speaker Mike Johnson announced a new policy barring transgender people from using bathrooms in the Capitol that don't match their biological gender. The new policy follows a similar bill introduced last week by South Carolina Representative Nancy Mace. Speaker Johnson was quick to point out that each member of Congress has their own private bathroom, and unisex bathrooms are available throughout the Capitol. McBride is the first openly transgender member of Congress and has indicated that she will follow the new policy. But in an appearance on Face the Nation Sunday, McBride called it an attack on a vulnerable community and said it was not only mean-spirited, but a misdirection, saying it was, quote, an attempt to distract from what they are actually doing, end quote. President-elect Trump has filled out his nominees for cabinet positions, making his final selection for the Department of Agriculture over the weekend. For that position, he selected Brooke Rollins, a lawyer from Texas who served in the first Trump administration, and then went on to found the America First Policy Institute, which is closely linked to Trump. Joining us to discuss the Trump cabinet and much more, Brett Samuels, White House reporter here at The Hill. Now, when it comes to Trump's cabinet, my take is that it's a lot of longtime friends, political allies, and Fox News personalities. What would you say is the overall flavor of the Trump cabinet nominees, at least?
Yeah, I think certainly what we've seen is, unlike his first go-round where he took his time kind of meeting with different potential nominees and eventually settling on some folks who are more establishment figures, folks who had been in Washington or had allies in Washington in some way. This time around, as you said, Trump is really relying on folks who he knows personally, folks who he has seen on TV a lot, whether it's Pete Hegseth, the Fox News host who's now the Pentagon nominee, Sean Duffy, the Transportation Secretary nominee, who also is a Fox host, Dr. Oz, one of his nominees for health,
another
Medicare
TV
and
guy.
Medicaid services, yeah, another TV guy. And Brooke Rollins, another one you mentioned over the weekend, who got tapped, the Secretary of Agriculture. She, as you mentioned, served in his first White House, founded this think tank that was very pro-Trump. So, he's not really taking any chances here. He's relying on people like Brooke Rollins, like Pam Bondi for Attorney General, who he knows will carry out his agenda, who he knows are not wild cards.
There are several nominees, Rollins included, that don't have a ton of experience in deep in the policy weeds of the departments they're leading. Others probably do. I wonder if you think that's going to present any potential problems for the administration as they try to navigate the complexities of Washington.
Yeah, again, I think this is where loyalty is clearly at the top of the list of qualifications for Trump. You mentioned Brooke Rollins. She was the domestic policy council leader in the first Trump White House. Obviously not the same as running a sprawling agency that has to deal with, help for farmers and farm aid, and, meat processing, things like that. You look at somebody like, Kristi Noem, who was nominated to lead the Department of Homeland Security. That's a massive department that focuses on immigration, but also cybersecurity, FEMA, and disaster response. Not exactly something, she's been governor and congressperson, but not exactly an agency she's done something similar with. And Pete Hegseth, the Defense Department nominee, who, again, he's a veteran. He's run, veterans organizations, but has not run an agency like this that oversees, hundreds of thousands of people and billion-dollar budgets and so on. So I do think it's something we're going to see a lot of senators ask about in the confirmation process.
Several of these nominees have faced accusations of sexual misconduct. Matt Gaetz was the pick for AG. He withdrew his name last week, but Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense, RFK Jr., HHS, Linda McMahon, Department of Education, all face various allegations. Both Hegseth and RFK Jr. have been personally accused of misconduct. McMahon was accused of failing to stop sexual abuse when she was running the World Wrestling Entertainment organization with her husband. I should say that all of these people have denied any wrongdoing. Do you expect it seems like it's going to be an ugly scene at these confirmation hearings?
Yeah, certainly. I would expect those ones that you mentioned are going to be at the top of the list of some of the more intense fights. I think it's fair to say Pete Hegseth, the allegations against him stemming from this 2017 incident at a hotel in California. The police report came out a few days ago, and he's obviously, as you said, denied wrongdoing, said this interaction with this woman was consensual. But the allegations against him have really taken center stage, I think. So would expect that to be a key part of the confirmation fight. RFK Jr., another one where these allegations, I feel like they sort of have been overshadowed in some ways because his rhetoric around vaccines and about drinking raw milk and
having a dead bear in his trunk.
Exactly. Those kinds of things seem to have overshadowed the allegations against him when it comes to sexual misconduct. So in his case, it will be interesting to see if that takes a more central role in the confirmation process.
Speaking of Matt Gaetz, he may not be the next Attorney General, but he is on Cameo, which, if you don't know, this is an app where you can basically pay famous people to give you a pep talk or a birthday congratulations. But surely he has more planned for his political future. What are you hearing about what he plans to do? And, I know there's been some rumblings of him trying to pursue that Florida governor spot that comes open when DeSantis is term limited in 26.
Yeah, that seems to be the most logical next step for him politically, certainly, unless Trump finds, in the meantime, some kind of appointee role for him in his administration where it wouldn't require Senate confirmation. But Matt Gaetz, obviously, he's not going to be seated in the next Congress because he resigned his seat. He doesn't appear to be interested in running for that seat in a special election or anything like that. And Trump has, in fact, encouraged the CFO of Florida to run for that seat. So Trump isn't even backing Gaetz to do something like that. So I do think all eyes will be on that governorship in 2026. We've heard Matt Gaetz' name floated. Byron Donalds, another congressman from Florida, his name has come up when it comes to a potential governor run. So that will be an interesting field to watch, I think, in a couple of years.
A Trump endorsement in that race would seem to be pretty important.
Could be key.
I want to talk about another Trump administration official, Sebastian Gorka. He's been picked by Trump to be the Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Counterterrorism. This role, importantly, does not require Senate confirmation, but has ruffled some feathers, even among some Republicans. He has hard-right views on immigration and Islam. The Washington Post had a quote from a person who they say is close to the Trump administration's national security transition team. Almost universally, the entire team considers Gorka a clown. They are dreading working with him. What does it say about the Trump administration that he's bringing someone like Gorka back in and kind of ignoring the concerns of some of the more mainstream Republicans that are part of his administration?
Yeah, I think, again, this is sort of an example of Trump 2.0, where he's less concerned about, working with, the quote-unquote establishment or, picking mainstream Republicans or folks with extensive experience doing these jobs. Sebastian Gorka is somebody who served for a short time in his first White House. As you mentioned, he certainly ruffled some feathers, rubbed some people the wrong way. Folks were bothered that he seemed to sort of inflate his standing and his role in the White House. and has since become, this podcast radio host who's just very pro-Trump all the time, which obviously is something that appeals to Trump now, and he's looking to stock his administration with these folks.
I wonder if the concern, though, is that it will lead to kind of this infighting and leaking that plagued the first administration and prevents the administration from getting accomplished what it wants to do.
Yeah, from folks I've talked to, on the one hand, the idea is that by picking all these folks who are loyal to him, everyone's on the same page. You kind of avoid this team of rivals, quote unquote, aura that his first administration had, where there was, the Kushner faction versus the Bannon faction versus the John Kelly faction, and these sort of warring factions. On the other hand, you introduce strong personalities like Sebastian Gorka into the mix, and inevitably it is going to create tension. And I think, that quote you read illustrates that not everyone is thrilled about some of the folks who are going to be joining the Trump administration.
I want to talk about the Department of Government Efficiency. This is Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy's effort to cut waste in government. Joni Ernst, the Republican senator from Iowa, is going to head the DOJ caucus in the Senate. Marjorie Taylor Greene is heading it in the House. There are reports that Elon and Vivek have been spending time in Washington and Mar-a-Lago interviewing candidates to work with them on this effort. The plan is to use executive action to achieve their goals. Elon says they want to cut $2 trillion, but it seems to me like the question is going to be, can they fight this out in the courts? Because there's surely to be challenges of them trying to use so much executive power, especially when so many jobs and so much money is on the line. Do you expect there to be a huge court battle over their ability to actually carry out this agenda?
Yeah, I think for sure, especially when you look at, the kinds of programs and the number of employees, for example, that would have to be eliminated or cut or rolled back in order for them to reach this very ambitious, let's say, goal of cutting, $2 trillion from the federal budget. I think these are things that they would have to look at, social safety net programs, just getting rid of thousands of government employees.
Whole government departments.
Right,
supposedly.
yeah, these are things that that certainly I think Democratic lawmakers will challenge in courts. Folks who work at those agencies will not, just accept their fate, I don't think, and go down without a fight. And that's where I think you see these folks who are looking to work on this on the congressional side could actually be quite important because, if Congress approves budgets that roll back some of these departments or funding for these departments, that's a little harder to challenge in the courts or to, push back against, I think.
I want to talk about what's next for Democrats. There's this battle brewing within the party between the left and centrist wings. There's kind of this unsettled argument. Did Harris-Walz lose because they were too progressive, or did they lose because they weren't progressive enough? And it seems like this battle is playing out in the selection of a new DNC chair. What do you think the selection for that post will say about the future of the Democratic Party?
Yeah, it seems like whenever a party has a sort of, big election loss where their expectations were optimistic and they fall short, they have this sort of, come to Jesus moment where they all have to sort of assess the direction of the party moving forward. We saw it with Republicans in 2012. We're seeing it now with Democrats here in 2024. And I think the selection of the next DNC chair will be a good window into how the party feels like it needs to move forward. Will it be somebody who is more aligned with progressives, more of the Bernie Sanders wing of the party? Will it be somebody, like the Democratic chair in Wisconsin, Ben Wickler? His name has been floated. Somebody who, is from a battleground state who maybe can speak to how to win over those working class voters that went for Trump this time around. Certainly it's a different fight than when Democrats hold the White House because the president kind of essentially gets to pick the DNC leader as a figurehead. But this time around, I think it will be a much more hotly contested fight, and it will be telling to see who ends up at the top.
Rahm Emanuel is the other name, more centrist wing of the party that's been floated, and even just the mention of his name has angered some progressives. If he ends up being the pick, I guess, what do you think? Is he the front runner?
I think based on name recognition alone, he'd have to be the front runner. But as you said, Rahm Emanuel is somebody who elicits very strong reactions one way or another. He undeniably has a strong track record of winning elections, of getting things done. He was previously the mayor of Chicago. He served as chief of staff in the White House. He's worked on campaigns successfully. So certainly has a track record and the resume to back it up. But he's not exactly somebody who has made friends with everyone in the Democratic Party. And certainly I think you'd see some progressive pushback if he really pushes for this role.
All right, that's all I got, Brett Samuels. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Drew.
The rivalry between billionaires Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos appears to be growing more heated. At stake are billions of dollars worth of contracts with the Pentagon, as well as leadership of the private spaceflight industry. News Nation's Tom Dempsey reports from the White House.
This rivalry between billionaires Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos appears to be growing more heated, and potentially at stake with all this could be billions of dollars in space contracts with the Pentagon, as well as who really is the leader when it comes to the private spaceflight industry. We saw this rivalry ignite even more recently when Musk posted to X, the social media site he owns, accusing Bezos of thinking President-elect Donald Trump would lose this past election and allegedly telling others to sell their stocks in Tesla and SpaceX, both owned by Musk. But Bezos responded saying, quote, 100% not true. Musk's friendship with Trump could make a big difference, though, when it comes to the future of the private spaceflight industry. SpaceX conducted around 100 rocket launches last year and has sent thousands of Starlink satellites into orbit. Blue Origin, on the other hand, the company Bezos founded in 2000, is yet to reach orbit. And while Musk has seen his friendship with the president-elect in recent months grow, Mr. Trump and Bezos have seen some testy moments over the past few years. In the past, the Washington Post, owned by Bezos, brought aggressive coverage of Trump's first term, which led to this post in 2018 when Mr. Trump called the paper an expensive lobbyist for Amazon. According to Politico, Blue Origin has been closely monitoring what sort of influence Musk may have on the president-elect's choice to lead NASA. Billions of dollars, like I said, in contracts with SpaceX and Blue Origin could be at risk. And according to Politico, the private spaceflight industry has voiced concerns that Musk may push for Catherine Leaders, currently the GM of the SpaceX Starbase facility in Texas. Politico also reports that Blue Origin has been voicing concerns to lawmakers on Capitol Hill about alleged unfair advantages when it comes to the space race and how Musk may be trying to develop a monopoly when it comes to space. At the White House, I'm Tom Dempsey, News Nation.
Employees at Charlotte Douglas International Airport are on strike today at the start of what's expected to be the busiest travel week of the year. ABM and Prospect Airport Services employees voted to go on strike on Friday, demanding better wages and respect on the job during the holiday travel season. Many of the workers provide services like escorting passengers in wheelchairs and cleaning the inside of planes. Officials say many of the employees earn between $12.50 and $19 per hour, well below the average living wage for a single person without children in the area. ABM said it would take steps to minimize disruptions to the holiday travel season. That's it for today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.